J.D. Vance piling on this wrestling match, this scrum.
The most astonishing moments that I've ever witnessed between two world leaders.
It was everywhere. You couldn't turn the page without somebody calling it a wrestling event.
How does this make America great again?
It just does not make any sense.
You poor, dumb bastards. It makes perfect sense. If only you watched professional wrestling.
Most people I know consider wrestling to be for fools, not to be studied or considered beyond a cheap insult or a punchline here and there. But the joke is on us if a deeper, shared understanding of wrestling parlance and culture eludes us for much longer. While Season 1 of Wrestling Darkness examines how and why we came to live in the world pro wrestling created, Season 2 kicks off with an introduction to some of the most famous plot twists in wrestling history as a prism through which to see, yes, the unprecedented tag team ambush of Volodymyr Zelenskyy in the Oval Office, and also as a way to anticipate future events that may otherwise be incomprehensible. Wrestling's leading scholar, Dr. Sharon Mazer, joins us once again from New Zealand, along with author and journalist Sarah Kerchak, who joins us from Toronto. In her forthcoming essay, Dr. Mazer grapples with the stubborn illusion of the theatrical as it applies to wrestling, politics, and humanity's uncertain future.
The best way that I can explain what happened and show Americans how to process this new reality was with another shocking turn of events from this weekend.
On Saturday night at the Elimination Chamber, the WWE shocked the world as John Cena turned heel, joined The Rock, and attacked Cody Rhodes.
It was a heel turn designed to create the alliance Trump always wanted in the first place. Trump and the Republicans like Putin better.
I'll tell you the problem I had with Jon Stewart's analysis. He seemed to be saying that just the fact that it is patterned after professional wrestling means that it's laughable and stupid. Mm-hmm. And so are the people who fall for it. I think we need to go way beyond that.
Yeah.
I think he's right that it was a heel turn. And I think that heel turns are the most fascinating thing in professional wrestling because there are so many layers. First of all, the guy in the boardroom, the ringmaster, is making a decision, a business decision, and then he needs his actors to make it emotional so that the audience is focused on the emotional display and not the business decision. So one example, and this is the one time where I experienced a heel turn, not knowing that professional wrestling was staged. 1982, I'm like 9 years old, and Jimmy the Superfly Snuka is becoming popular, even though he's supposed to be this brute who's not even capable of speech.
Right.
And Captain Lou Albano is his manager. But then they do this really step-by-step. And this happened also with the Oval Office thing, right? First, Zelenskyy is the one who is the dictator. Ukraine is the one who started the war. Like there was some setup. And the setup for Snuka is Snuka starts to realize that he's being cheated by Lou Albano.
You keep telling everyone how much money you're saving for this man. Let's hear, where is this money going? Well, first of all, Mr. Buddy Rogers, it's none of your damn business.
And then Snuka actually finally speaks. And he says, I think I'd like to change my management.
I don't say much, but I'd just like to ask you just one thing. Yes, sir. I would like you, yes, sir, to be my manager.
Then when he goes out to have a match against Ray the Crippler Stevens, it's the one you see on Sunday morning. So I turned on wrestling because they didn't have Saturday morning cartoons on Sunday morning. That's how I got wrestling, So on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, wrestling was on, and I've just started to get into it, and I'm loving the storyline. Like maybe this Polynesian guy could turn into a good guy. And then Ray the Crippler Stevens and Lou Albano and maybe another wrestler, they attack him, and they basically torture him for like 15 minutes.
Albano hammering away on Snuka. They cut him back. top rope.
And so I'm an 8-year-old watching this thing like I'm going to be sick. Blood everywhere, and they pile drive his head into concrete a couple times. He's quivering on the ground. And you can also hear people, I watched it again recently, you can hear people in the audience who also don't know that it's fake, and they're wailing.
Another pile driver on the cement floor.
Snuka, he appears with a neck brace a few times, and then pretty soon he's healed, and then they fight each other all over the, in every arena across the U.S., and they make a bunch of money.
Lou Albano, what you have done to me is something, brother.
So, the kind of turn you're talking about requires a little bit more build. It's easier to make someone instantly evil than instantly babyface. So you will have the seeds of, hints of something building up along the lines, and then they will either be suddenly betrayed after a great deal of foreshadowing and blatant suggestions in some cases, because it's also wrestling. You can only be so subtle sometimes. Traditionally, the audience is supposed to feel either, like horrified and supportive of the wronged face, whether someone is turning face or whether a baby face has been betrayed in the process, and virulent anger at the heel. That has clearly changed as audiences have become more aware and as the curtain has been pulled back. I mean, there's a lot of discussion going on in wrestling fandom circles around the reception of the Cena heel turn, because the audience was just cheering it. There was no garbage being thrown in the ring. There wasn't even like a scandalized child crying in the front row to really help that along. It's just...
Where's the crying child?
Crying child, go on. People weren't really willing to live in the moment so much as just from an intellectual perspective. Everyone's wanted to see what Cena will do as a heel, because he hasn't been since I enjoyed him when he was
that close-up of his face. He looks, again, this is a problem with the WWE now, is that it's done so much for the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So that close-up of his face, that he's a heel from the face.
Yeah.
I don't know what you'd feel in the arena, but those things happen with agreement, right? You do a heel turn to make your baby face look like a baby face. Trump and Vance were trying to force upon the heroic president of Ukraine a heel turn that he didn't take.
Mm-hmm.
But if in their imaginations and in their handlers' imaginations, there are baby-faced heroes, then having Zelenskyy in the room, a genuine hero, is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So they were trying to force him into a heel position. And the only thing he could do in that regard was not to perform. So what is interesting is here is this consummate performer who has honed a performance as a wartime president that is magnificent by any standard, whose only option in that room was to refuse to perform at all.
Mm-hmm.
He was visibly steadfastly refusing to perform. He looked like he wasn't acting, which is a classic baby face, right? Where they look genuinely hurt, they look genuinely bewildered, like the rug's been pulled out from underneath them and there's nothing they can do about it. Cody Rhodes with John Cena, just flabbergasted. The job of the babyface in that moment is to look as absolutely natural, as like us as possible. And so Zelenskyy did as much babyface as he could against what was essentially a heel performance by men who thought they were performing the babyface.
And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. Your country is in big trouble.
Can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this.
I don't think there was anyone involved who would ever have imagined that Zelenskyy would choose to portray vulnerability in any way, because none of them would. So I think they were more hoping that he would fly off the handle and be the heel than to actually step back and speak out of earnestness.
So if they were gaming it forward, you're right. If they were gaming it forward,
Yeah.
he would have said, I'm not taking this
Yeah.
anymore, and he would have stormed off. But they had to talk like he stormed off, even though he didn't do that.
Yeah.
That's the proof that it was all a setup.
Yeah.
All the Republican media empire, Fox News and all of the talking heads all said, oh, did you see how rude he was? Oh, so rude. He was.
Yeah.
And Jon Stewart had a lot of fun with that.
There was this attitude of ungratefulness, seeing his smirk, seeing him roll his eyes, seeing him refer to J.D. Vance, the vice president, as J.D.
President Zelenskyy was also antagonistic, and frankly, he was rude.
So impertinent, so disrespectful.
Going in and fighting back, getting sassy with the president and the
He was
vice president.
sassy.
He was sassy.
He was sassy. You better watch your tone, mister.
It was extraordinary, the way in which Trump ran over everything that Zelenskyy said. So there was, I've never seen wrestlers not give stage to the other guy, right? Because you can't have opposition if your opposition hasn't got a place to stand.
And you can't accuse him of talking too much if he never gets to talk.
Exactly. What? It's kayfabe, but it's also something beyond kayfabe because the performance isn't enough under control.
Well, Trump lacks the conviction of a good heel, is that part of the performance is that you are willing to be hated and to work up that audience. And even though he is not performing for people like us, he wants the capitulation of us.
Yeah.
He can't stand anyone who will fight back. So he just wants to ramble on and not be clear about his points and then have everyone not really boo him, just, respectfully fear him if we're not on his side.
You're so right. That is exactly right. That is so clear. So he is doing the heel moves to a certain degree, but because he's not right into it as a heel, he still is. It's the same as Hulk Hogan continuing to perform while the audience is booing him. Trump is doing heel moves. Vance is doing heel moves, but he's hearing applause in the same way that Hulk Hogan continued in his performance imagination to hear applause when he was giving this failed promo thing that he did on Monday Night Raw. That is exceptional. I think that's really important, Sarah. He's in the heel position. He's performing heelness, a baby face in their imaginations, but delivering heel performance because they weren't enough in control. So that not quite real, not quite not realness of what they're doing is what gives us the WWE bounce that everybody's got, because it was worldwide, right? You couldn't turn the page without somebody calling it a wrestling event.
Mm-hmm.
It was everywhere. We're not original any longer. That ship has so sailed.
That's a good thing.
I don't think it's a bad thing. But if it's not accompanied by the analysis, it just becomes cheap and nobody does anything.
I think it's probably a useful step just for everyone's, the general public's comprehension of what is going on, that people are viewing it through this framework. Hopefully we'll move beyond oh shit, this is like wrestling, to figure out how the hell we're going to deal with this and just function in our daily lives and try to survive and support each other when, our lives are in the hands of people who are not only wrestling at its worst poison, but completely irony poison too, where how do you navigate what's serious and what's for show when, everything that is for show ends up impacting people's lives. I'm here in Canada. I have already lost work from the tariffs today. Actions that might not even exist tomorrow, but made for good show and good promos in wrestling speak. So I'm glad we know what we're dealing with, but I have absolutely no idea how we talk about moving forward in this sphere.
All right, there's an important part of the equation that has been ignored, and that's the audience, right? So Trump is like a professional wrestler. You can say that and move on to the next thing, and yeah, he is. But there's a relationship to the audience that's going to be put to the test, because wrestling and politics have both shown that people have an appetite to see the other people suffer.
Yeah.
But when it's your community, it's your family, when it's you, then I think there is a limit. And as they transition to, well, yeah, the economy is tanking and yeah, inflation is going up, but you're doing it to help make them suffer. How far are people going to be willing to go with that?
Well, I keep going that shit's got real thing, right? When the price at the gas tank goes up, when almost everyone knows someone who's lost their job or had their neighbors taken away. So, yes, it's supposed to be the guy next to them and not them, but it's just getting a bit too close. Trump has always been successful because he's really responsive to that audience. For someone who is such a brute, he has an amazing, intuitive response to his audience and where his audience is going and what's working, what isn't. What was interesting about Hogan and Monday Night Raw was that he gave one performance to the audience, gave him it back differently. Are we going to get to the point where Trump gives a performance and the audience gives it back differently? I don't know. There are face turns that are instant, like Lex Luger, helicoptering in to beat Yokozuna on the 4th of July, wearing stars and stripes. That's a huge investment in a babyface moment that didn't take in the long run. Anyhow, it was about a year before he went back to his old tricks because nobody bought it from Lex Luger. And maybe that's a good approximation for Donald Trump with his Saved by God and all of that. Somewhere, I still think it's really Hulk Hogan that he models himself on. And they are very, very proximate.
Yes.
In their performance practices, there's no question.
Well, the audience for the forced or attempted forced heel turn on Zelenskyy is certainly not people who support Ukraine, right?
No.
It's not Europe. What it is it's conservative Republican voters who, because of gerrymandering, have enormous outsized influence on our politics. And so Trump is working to shore up that support. Not anybody outside of that, 30%. He just needs that 30% of the country to support whatever's going to happen with Putin.
Meanwhile, they're getting booed, the Republicans, when they go into town halls, and so they're not going to do it anymore. So will that breaking point be when Putin bombs France? Will that be the point where everybody goes, hang on a minute, where the majority who are not happy with Doge and with Elon Musk doing Elon Musk-ish things and all of that, there's almost no coming back from the destruction that Elon Musk is perpetrating, right? The chaos is so impactful. It has to be. So what happens when Trump senses that his own popularity, as he imagines it, that 30%, is going to leave him because of Musk? There's your manager thing that you were talking about, Eric, because I do believe, especially when he took out that chainsaw, but even that jumping up and down on the platform thing, Musk is performing in the same way that a heel manager often performs. And what happens when those heel managers go too far? Either they steal the thunder from their proteges, or they do something really corrupt. So what is the equivalent then? Where does Musk get off? At what point does that performance that he's giving stop selling so well that it puts Trump's performance and the selling of Trump's performance at risk?
Okay, here's one for you, Sarah. You're the captain of the writers team, okay, and you've got to write an exit for Musk. Whether it's wrestling or it's American politics, does it even matter? How do they get Musk off the stage if he turns out to be, a huge liability for Trump and the Republicans politically?
They set him up and he becomes the scapegoat for absolutely everything. And then we get Trump being, horrified, for the sake of the American people, for how they have been betrayed. And that he is the hero for having banished this man and saved America once again.
But would they get Musk to agree to play the role?
That was my question, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that at some point and in some way Musk can be severely compromised.
Maybe if Putin and Trump gang up on Musk.
That could be. I mean, there's got to be some kind of massive blackmail material out there.
I mean, his kid wiping his nose on the desk in the Oval Office and telling Trump to shut up isn't enough. I mean,
No, not
I mean, the scene
clearly.
is hilarious. You could
It might not even
this.
be anything Musk does so much as when things start to pile up, he is the easiest patsy that can be like done away with without any sort of.
But he has to agree, right? Or else there's a war going on with Musk and all his social media ammunition, all his money, against the Republican Party and Trump. And so, I mean, I think Trump would use the Justice Department to force him to agree. So basically, we're going to sue you. We're going to criminally charge you for something. And then you agree. And so then you do this thing that everyone will say, oh, well, that offends America. And it has to be worse than not wearing a suit. It has to be something really bad. Right. And then Musk can
than a Nazi salute, because that's already been done.
Well, yeah. I mean, no, it has to offend the Nazis.
Doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
You have to offend the Nazis.
Yes.
God, we have come to that.
He did say when he was talking about the visas that allow really skilled workers to come in.
Oh, yeah, that hit a nerve.
Oh, the HB1s.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who said, fuck you, Musk. And he was like, fuck you, too. You're just idiotic racists. Sometimes we have to stomach non-white people in the tech industry.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe all those Afrikaans refugees from South Africa will start eating cats and dogs. I mean,
so there's so many great analogies to Hulk Hogan, for Trump, and I think one of them, it goes back to that Montreal screw job, which I did want to touch upon. And Sarah, being a Canadian, she can set the stage for us. But basically, we have a similar situation where there was supposed to be this huge dramatic shift, but one of the wrestlers, so Zelenskyy, right, is Bret Hart, and then Putin is McMahon. And there's this struggle right up to the time when they actually have to go on stage to determine how this story is going to end, right?
Yeah. Bret Hart is, a stubborn man, but he had a point. All he wanted to do was to retain the title in Canada and then drop it in the US at a later date. But that was not enough to punish someone who had decided to pursue better financial support that he was getting from WCW, because he was, obviously leaving. That's why he was dropping the belt. So everyone behind the scenes basically conspired so that during a move that had been previously agreed upon that Bret Hart would break out of, which is his own move, the sharpshooter, that the ref would say that Bret tapped and that he would lose and be humiliated in Montreal, to be made to pay for seeking better employment and standing up for himself and trying to stay true to his character and also, his ego a little bit. So it was just a way to humiliate a long-term faithful worker in front of a home country crowd and to spark decades of scandal that they could mine and mythologize for themselves.
Oh, okay.
The interesting thing, of course, is the bell. Vince getting the bell to ring early.
Yes.
The finish was agreed, and then Vince called the bell, and the bell robbed Bret of the finish that he was promised.
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't Vince McMahon just pay his wrestlers as much as the WCW is going to pay them? Or why does he want the story to be this whole screw job thing more than the real story? That's the first question I have.
I believe it was because WCW just had deeper pockets at that point in time. They had the Turner Broadcasting empire behind them. Ted Turner was throwing money at any talent they could get away from WWF at the time. And then in terms of why it went down that way, it was pure ego and spite on Vince's part, that this is someone he had treated sort of like a wrestling son for a long time, and that even though he had ostensibly supported him seeking a better way to support himself and his family, just could not let him get away without turning the knife somehow.
Politically, Trump and Vance needed to get to a place where the drama, the emotion, would make it make sense to their audience that the United States would abandon the free world, abandon Ukraine, abandon NATO, and do everything that Putin requires. The things that came out subsequently, they're going to pause military aid to Ukraine, unilaterally disarming when it comes to this cyber warfare with Russia, like that was going to happen. Trump knows this. So then they need to stage this thing. So we're paying attention to that. We understand it to be, oh, well, Trump's just mad at Zelenskyy because he didn't wear a suit or because he didn't say thank you. That's where I see the analogy, is that the conclusion of the story is already written for some stupid decision that we don't, it's behind the scenes. And they create this emotional performance as a plot twist to kind of get the audience to follow a different story. I'm sure the image of Bret Hart spitting on Vince McMahon's face is a lot more memorable than, well, basically he couldn't afford to compete with Ted Turner in terms of paying his wrestlers.
I think the screw job backfired. I don't think Vince had in his head that it was going to cause the scandal that it did. So my guess is that it was ego, and the anger at Bret for wanting to leave was enough to spark the rest of it, regardless.
I'm sorry it took so long to get to your article, though, because
It's really okay.
I read it.
I'm taking a long time to get to this article.
Well, I was so delighted. It's like, because I loved your book, and then the article comes along, and, the sequel's never as good as the original, but this is better. This is really better. And when you go to like a 3D movie, and you've got these glasses, and you really, if you don't have the blue and the red at the same time, it's just a mess, right? And what you're saying is that we need to see and understand the dramaturgy of wrestling, and we need to see and understand what's happening in this Trump era of American history. And we need to see them both at the same time to really have some clarity about what's going on. And I just found that brilliant and also hopeful. Is that what you intended?
I don't know that I'm feeling hopeful. Thank you so much. I mean, it's still very raw, and it will be better once it's in the hands of an editor, I think. But the how Marx says, first time tragedy, second time farce. What I worry about is first time farce, second time tragedy with the two Trump terms. I really am concerned that the same patterns that played out, where we could maintain some distance, some humor, some hope of something different, they're playing out now in a way that seems very tragic, inevitably tragic, in the classic sense of tragedy, that it's inevitable. That the only thing that's going to stop this is something catastrophic. Something so catastrophically real that it stops the show, like Owen Hart falling from the rafters. God, can I write that down really fast so I can put that in?
It's being recorded, Sharon.
You'll have to remind me, but I that's what I think is happening. I think that until something like that happens, something so catastrophically real happens, the game will just keep going on, and people will be injured, but none of that injury will be acknowledged. After Owen Hart fell from the rafters, the game went on with blood on the platform, which is still the most horrifying thing. That even then, something so real as a man falling 80 feet from the ceiling onto the platform and dying in front of however many thousand people didn't fully stop the show. I don't know that I'm hopeful. I think something catastrophic is going to have to happen before that trajectory changes. And even then, the residue will still be with us. We can talk about Trump finally realizing that Musk is stealing his limelight and undermining his connection with his voters. And so he turns on Musk, and Musk is dismissed. But there'll be Vance still in the wings, and Mike Johnson, sort of snaking around, and all of that carries on. So I don't think that's enough to stop this machine. especially if it's somebody like Putin pulling the strings,
Yeah.
the ringmaster. So the real fear that I have is that it's going to take real blood and a lot of it to stop this show that we're watching when it's so much happening that is so evil, so many people being injured. And I don't mean to be Debbie Downer here. I really feel horrible at saying this. But if I take the analogy that I've been running with,
Owen Hart falling from the ceiling?
Owen Hart falling from the rafters, the rig that was supposed to keep him safe, failing because the machinery around him failed to ensure that that rig was safe, so that he gets up there and he doesn't really want to be there, but he gets up there and he gives it a shot and he ends up dead in front of tens of thousands of people. And even so, the show goes on. What does it take is my real question here. What will it take for the United States to stop, look, and think about how to be a nation that somehow resembles the ideals that we are fed from childhood?
Yeah.
So that's my rant.
I'm sorry for saying hope. I'll just clarify. Maybe I'll either edit the word hope out or clarify. And
Yeah, you have control, Eric. You have control.
But what I mean is that you basically write that when the figurative Owen Hart, who by the way is the brother of Bret Hart,
yes,
dies in front of us all, will we have the right glasses on? And what I love about your essay is it provides us the glasses to understand that's a human life that's been lost, that the show should not continue as it's been going on, that something has to change. Like, I think that this essay that you're writing, this paper, I don't think it should just be a paper, by the way. I think the world...
It is a book eventually.
Yeah, it's a book. And I think it's going to happen. I do think it's going to happen that when these... I've already accepted that these calamities are going to happen, but I think it's possible that these glasses that you have suggested for us that can see both, the kayfabe and the real politic and the real human impacts of it, that I think that's possible for all the fans, not just the ones who've been wrestling fans, but the people who've been watching this, whether they wanted to or not.
The thing that has caught me by surprise is just how inured from reality of like any actual impact in any way that not just Trump's most core supporters, but sort of like the peripheral ones feel. Because up here, we are taking those constantly threaded suggestions of the 51st state very seriously. We see the pattern. We see that the trolling is how Russia started poking at Ukraine before the invasion. We're also watching the manufacturing of consent that's happening in American and Canadian media. And yet I keep running into Americans who are just like, well, you're just falling for trolling. It's just a joke. And it's just like impossible to so many of them that anything real of consequence could happen.
Yeah.
It is going to actually take something that feels real to not just his core base, but like anyone who still thinks he might have a point, to jar them out of this whole like detached, ironic, it's all jokes, nothing ever happens complacency.
The glasses that you created for us, right? The 3D glasses, you used two frameworks. One is the tragic death of Owen Hart, and then the other one is this time where wrestlers that had been enemies in the show gave a final sort of curtain call.
The curtain call.
Yeah.
It's the curtain call.
So,
which is another very famous episode.
Right. And they both are these moments where there's a piercing of the wall between the fake and the real. right? And that's what you're asking us. Will we be ready to accept reality when something jars us into reorienting ourselves back to reality? So I just wanted to ask you, like, you chose those two moments.
I originally conceived of the paper for a different group, which was about the anti-theatrical prejudice, going back to Jonah Barish's famous book from, I guess, the 60s or 70s. There was a famous book called The Anti-Theatrical Prejudice by Jonas Barish, who talks about that history of anti-theater sentiment, starting with the Greeks and going all the way through. Start with Plato always and head up. So the first challenge I'd given myself was to align the prejudice against theater with the prejudice against professional wrestling. The thing that Plato hated about the theater, the thing that always gets people going about the theater, is not so different to the thing that gets people going about wrestling. That is that it's fake. First and foremost, it's not real, and it risks inculcating immoral or amoral values on unsuspecting audiences who believe what they're seeing to be real. So the first challenge I gave myself was to align that. And you can't get to a breaking of that fourth wall, that sense that pretends that play pretend that this is real more aggressively than in Own Heart's Fall, right? That's where it breaks, literally, like the rig.
Yeah.
Writing this essay, I always write to find out. The luxury of being an academic, not a journalist, is that you can write to find things out, and you can. I think I've taken too much time with this in some ways, but when I think it's been almost a year since I proposed this paper, and a year that I've been working on it, off and on, but still fairly intensively, I think the thing that I discovered in the writing of it was that we need a certain degree of play pretend in order to make sense of the world. So a successful theater event will start with a status quo, some kind of rupture or breaking of the status quo, a catalyst, a rising action in which the conflict carries on to a climax, a resolution of some sort, and a denouement, settling into a new status quo. And in real life, someone like Victor Turner in his proposition for social drama turns that into a formula for understanding daily life. And when he proposes social drama, there's a breach, there's a crisis, there's our attempt to redress, and then there's a new status quo, a settling in, or which he calls reconciliation, I think, or there's a recognition of schism ongoing. So he says, what happens in the theater happens in life. So all of these foundational texts and tools that we use to talk about professional wrestling, and that I try to apply from professional wrestling to how it reflects the way the world is working, seem to get us to the same place. At some point, it breaks down. And then everybody has to scramble until the narrative reestablishes itself and we can move forward again together for another period of agreement until it breaks down again. And this is cyclical. So what professional wrestling does really beautifully is it replays this 10 times in an evening sometimes, right? You have a status quo, everybody's hunky-dory, and then two men go, I can't stand you, and bang, bang, bang. And then it's resolved, and then it starts up again. So we're really conditioned in wrestling, as in life, for this cyclical sort of sense of ruptures. And every time you think it's resolved, something happens. So I was thinking of like that, the melee that happens when you think the match is over and the wrestlers storm the stage and everything turns upside down again, right? That kind of wonderful way of generating heat in wrestling. And so the curtain call reversed that. If it had been classic wrestling, maybe the other two guys would have come racing in, but they would have stirred it up. And what they performed was reconciliation instead. That's really fascinating, that curtain call. The problem with the Montreal Screwjob is that the finish was supposed to happen in a certain way. And the rupture was the breaking of that. And that played out in real life over years and years until Hart reconciled himself with McMahon eventually. The question is, what does it take to give us at least a momentary sense of reconciliation? There are ruptures and there are ruptures, and these narratives tend to overlap. I'm really interested in how, in the same way that the anthropologist Victor Turner did, the sociologist Irving Goffman did, how you can take wrestling as a paradigm for explaining the structure of everyday life, and in this case, political life. That's sort of where. So, how did I come to Owen Hart? Well, I wanted to talk about the anti-theatrical prejudice first, for which one of the key things is the suspension of disbelief, that the audience willingly goes along with and acts as if what's happening on stage is real. And I wanted to align that with the way wrestling audiences do. And then I wanted to think about the limits of that. If you take a curtain call in professional wrestling, will the next time be different as a result? If you fall to your death in professional wrestling, will the next time be different? And I think the answers are no. And that makes me sound like a deeply depressed and cynical person, which I don't mean to be, because I also think if we can analyze it, surely we can change our behavior. And if you do it collectively, can you make a difference? Can we make a difference? But I really don't know how to end it because, and that's where I've been stalled for weeks. I don't know how to end it because it's not over and I don't have the distance, and one shouldn't be writing without distance. That's what journalists do. Academics are supposed to wait a minute, and I haven't done that.
In terms of not knowing where to finish, I mean, part of the problem is that wrestling never finishes. There is no off
Yeah.
season. This cycle just keeps going, and apparently we don't learn that much from it along the way. Or it
No.
cannibalizes itself, like how the curtain call has now become part of the wrestling mythology that they keep digging back at and, trying to bring into the fold somehow.
In wrestling, the violence was on the surface and the agreement was gentle. It was a light touch. But here, the violence is on the surface and it's below the surface. There's no escape from it.
Mhm.
What are we supposed to do with that? It's one thing to be playing at violence and to understand that the people with the money are all on side and they're going to take advantage of all of us. But here, this is beyond that. This is the billionaires just. I get nostalgic for Nixon, who at least knew that he was a crook when he was saying he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm nostalgic to some degree to Reagan, who, knew that he was winking at us and who at least on the surface wasn't violent.
Yeah, there's really nowhere to anchor yourself, nowhere to figure out a logic puzzle. We can't predict when I wake up tomorrow. I don't know what the hell's waiting me.
Oh, and you have to pity me. I wake up in the morning and I have the news of the day before. So I woke up, what was it, Saturday morning, to the news of the Oval Office. It was like I wasn't even conscious, and I was hearing them talk about it, and I'm thinking, what the hell happened? Yeah, what great hell is this? Mephistopheles, why this is hell, nor are we out of it.
Well, really quick last thought. I think that the ability to come to terms with reality is going to be something gradual, and it's going to be in different communities. I think there's going to be a awareness that we are being manipulated by these stories. And the reason why the essay kind of gave me hope, partially it's because in horrible times, art is always uplifting, right? Something beautiful can come out of tragedy. But the other reason is that, we haven't really said it out loud, but the reason why we're so frustrated is that the consumers of political theater are acting like wrestling fans. So it doesn't matter if they shake hands and they bow, or it doesn't matter if someone dies. Nothing matters. They'll just believe the next lie. They're eating our dogs. They stole the election. The children are being trafficked in cabinet cases. And no matter how much they're lied to, they just keep coming back for more.
Frogs are gay. Frogs are being turned gay.
The frogs are being turned. There's something frustrating to the non-wrestling fan, and even the wrestling fan who watches this and say, wow, this thing that works so well, for entertainment, when it becomes your government, doesn't work so well. We see that now. I think there's going to be a gradual realization for the general public. And I think that it's okay that your essay ends with the question, when our hero falls to his death in front of us, will we know this is real? Will we understand this is real? I mean, at least we're asking the right question, because I think that is the right question. Wrestling Darkness is written, recorded, and edited by yours truly, Eric Byler. The music is composed by Michael Brook, while this jazzy improv rendition you are hearing now was performed by David Benene and Stephen Munoz. Wrestling Darkness and other content you will find on the Eric Byler Substack feed are supported by a 501c3 nonprofit called ID Alliance. You can support us by subscribing or by making a tax-deductible donation. Thanks for listening.